Hello and welcome to the 11FS Spotlight Show live from Lendit USA. USA, that's weird saying it like that, isn't it? Anyway, USA 2022. My name is David Brear. In this show, we shine a bit of a spotlight on the best and the brightest in the fintech and financial services industry to try and understand what is it that gets them going, growing, and what they really think the future of the industry will actually look like. On today's Spotlight, I'm delighted to be joined by Kristen Anderson, who is the co-founder and CEO over at Catch. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good morning. Doing great. How are you?
Good. It is bright and early in New York, right?
It is.
We've managed to get set up, but haven't quite found where I get copious amounts of coffee just to kind of like deal with this situation yet. But
it's been running dry really quick.
We'll find that next anyway. But so what we're going to be doing on today's show is going to talk a little bit about your career, your background, and actually the future of payroll in that sense, in terms of obviously what you guys do at Catch. Maybe if we start off with a little bit about your background, and actually maybe if we start with what's the 1 minute pitch for Catch?
Sure. So the 1 minute pitch for Catch is basically, pitch for Catch. It's for people who don't get benefits from an employer. They have to take care of the benefits themselves. So we're talking independent contractors, freelancers, gig workers, even people who might be W-2 traditional employees whose employers don't provide those products and services. A simple and easy way to manage things like tax withholding, retirement, health insurance, all in one place.
Amazing. I mean, this is a problem I'm guessing you've seen or experienced lots of people having as well to a certain degree. So, I mean, what was the sort of thesis? Why did you think it was they always say, why you, why now? Like, what's the why now moment in that sense?
Yeah, so two pieces of why now. My co-founder was a freelance designer and engineer, so he really firsthand lived that problem.
Felt that pain, yeah.
Why is it so hard, right? He had done work at Google, he had done work at Microsoft, and he was used to those sort of phenomenal systems to manage benefits. And then when he went out on his own, he found that a lot of stuff was on him that was time consuming and complicated and just fragmented and difficult. So he was the initial sort of like, I live this problem. My journey into our mission is that I grew up with a union family. So my dad didn't graduate college. He worked for the phone company and was part of a union his entire career. And we actually had a very stable and like healthy, wealthy, middle-class life because of those benefits. Yep. So I think when I saw Catch and the opportunity to change the conversation around like, what does a financial safety net mean? And when is it important that it is delivered by an employer versus how are we providing that same sort of system for people who don't have one single employer providing them a paycheck every 2 weeks?
Yeah. And obviously from a market perspective, that's increasingly large amount of people in the market, right? Yeah. This isn't a niche in that sense. This is a pretty mainstream problem, right?
Huge and growing. And again, I think a lot of people struggle to define the boundaries of this market because they'll sort of narrow in on rideshare or food delivery on the more traditional gig work. Or they're thinking of like true freelancers, right? Who might be a software engineer who like are solopreneurs. But the answer is it's actually much broader than that. Hairstylists or independent contractors, right? Photographers, like everyone who works in the wedding industry, loan officers are all independent contractors, right? So we touch a lot of different types of employment. And I think right now the estimates are about 50 to 60 million people don't get benefits from their employer right now. Wow. So massive. This is not a small problem.
Yeah. No, I mean, and as you say, just from a percentage of the market in terms of, SMEs, SMBs, there's it's like 80% of the market. So that is when you look at your addressable market, that's a good graph, isn't it?
It's huge. One of our best partners is Square, and we actually work with their payroll team, which we'll get into in a second, right? But payroll is a really important way to get services to people through employers, but Square serves a lot of small businesses that may not be able to offer those benefits to their employees, right? For cost or for like the way the work works. So we work with Square Payroll to be able to provide those services to people who might even be traditional employees in a tax sense, but may still need those additional products like retirement and health insurance, even though they're not like a standard freelancer or contractor.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about your role then in the company. Obviously, we talk about, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but CEO, like the job's sort of quite broad in terms of the things that you need to do. So, but before we sort of get into that, tell us a little bit more about your background. Like, how did you end up founding a business? What sort of led you to having that ambition?
I think my founding story is probably a little unusual, which makes it a fun story to tell. My background is in product. So I started in fintech in 2014, 8 years ago. And my role was to build financial products and services for underrepresented customers. And we were a nonprofit, and we would sell our solution to banks and credit unions, right? So a nonprofit approach to fintech is pretty uncommon way to get started in the industry.
I mean, there's an argument a lot of fintech's non-profit.
That's fair.
That might be a dig at some people. So.
Intentionally nonprofit, right?
That's true.
No, I guess you could say some of them don't intend to earn a profit ever as well. And then I moved into more venture-backed, right? I got the opportunity to see what it looked like when companies had a steep growth trajectory, leading product at a company that did student loan repayment as an employer benefit. And then I actually joined Catch as our head of product when we had 5 employees. I was hired. So my co-founder hired me off of AngelList, which is just a wonderful story. And I think a lot of times people underestimate the power of working with your co-founder in a non-committed relationship. So that you can figure out if you want to work together. And I think a lot of people think that, okay, well, investors don't like to fund solo founders, so I better make sure I have a co-founder. So they go to some meetup and they shake hands with a guy, and then we're like, okay, we're in this for the next 10 years, right? It's not a very successful way to find a co-founder,
sure.
Right? So my co-founder hired me to lead product. Within 6 months, it was pretty apparent I was doing a lot more than that. So I took on a COO and co-founder role. He was our CEO. And then after about a year and a half as COO, we had a really important conversation that was just like, what's the CEO job and who should be doing that? So my co-founder, he is a designer and engineer by trade. He belongs with our product. He belongs on the build side. And I tell this story quite frequently, which is ironic and funny, but he says his biggest pet peeve is repeating himself. And that's what a CEO does all day, right? Whether it's with interviews, whether it's with partners or potential employees or to customers, right? I tell the same stories all the time, right? So I think it was just a match for the person for the role. And I've been CEO for, I guess, almost 3 years now, which is just an amazing opportunity to just lead people. And like we were talking about, the ability to watch your team grow and flourish is a really special thing about the role.
Yeah, there's something really weird about that, isn't there? That if you can still keep saying, me and one of the founders of 11FS have this conversation a lot. Actually, we're still saying the same thing 6 years later. And if you can still keep saying the same thing 6 years later and still do it with passion, you're probably in the right role at that point, aren't you? But,
totally.
It's not for everybody, though, in that sense.
No, it's not. I have a friend who said that you have to become a meme of yourself. And you have to be willing to sort of memify yourself into the point where people should be making fun of you.
Yeah.
They should be making fun of you. And if they're not, then you're not saying it enough and you're not saying it clearly enough. And I think that really stuck with me.
The parody of ourselves in that sense.
Yeah.
Maybe let's talk a little bit more about payroll then in that sense. I mean, we recently had a bit of a debate on the podcast about really the importance of payroll data, because there's such an absence of that from an industry perspective, and actually even from from an employee to employer relationship perspective, there's quite a big gap there. I mean, some guys were sort of likening it to a bit of a holy grail in that sense, in terms of the access to that and what that really brings from an industry perspective. Would you agree with that?
No.
Well, that's awkward. We'll move on now.
Let's jump right into that. I think payroll data is very important, but I think there is an assumption that it's complete.
Sure.
And what we see from our customers is a majority of that 50 to 60 million group might be earning some W-2 income that shows up in payroll data, but they might also be earning income from an e-commerce shop. They might also be earning income on one of the platforms, right? And so payroll data is viewed as a source of truth, but it's not. It's one piece of the income story. And I think we set ourselves up to make bad decisions in terms of how that's used for customers and lending and things like that, right? How are customers who look like mine actually getting mortgages when their W-2 income is actually just a fractional part of how they earn money?
Yeah. So to that point, it's not a single source. It's not a single thing. It's a multi-streamed, very complex,
variability. That's right. That's right.
And how do businesses solve for that to a certain degree? I mean, what's the way in which you're looking to address that problem?
Here's the meme. We serve SSNs, not EINs. So we serve social security numbers, not employer identification numbers. Sure. Basically, it means we serve people.
Yeah.
And the way you solve that problem is the source of truth of how someone earns income and what income someone has earned sits with that person, right, and their bank account. And so I think it's a flipping of the model where the assumption that payroll must be top-down, employer distributed to many employees instead of payroll is actually like a fractional function that you can apply to any transaction, right? So like I mentioned, e-commerce. We have some e-commerce customers who are selling 10, 20, 30 products a day. They don't necessarily want to sit down every week or month or maybe year and sort of add up what they've earned and then try and figure out their taxes. So we apply that payroll layer to a single transaction that comes in whenever it comes in, however much it is. My favorite story is we have a guy who makes wooden boxes in Hawaii, and they're beautiful. They're handcrafted, right? He sells them online. And every
so jealous
time
of people like that, aren't you? Like, it makes me really question my decision making for my
I know.
career.
Can we make anything real? I don't know. They're beautiful, and people like will propose with them. They're like these wedding ring boxes, and every time he sells one, he puts in $1.17 into his retirement account because we do it automatically. We automatically recognize that income and fractionalize it to taxes, retirement, all those other things that he needs. So I think that's the place where I see payroll is defined in a very narrow way right now, for good reason, right? There's a market that's existed for the last 75 years, but we see the next 75 years as payroll, where it lives with a person and it's about the transaction. So one of my sayings is, payments are income in the future of work, right? Payments aren't just payments, they're income. So how are we thinking about income and applying payroll to income transactions?
That's amazing. And the sort of automated nature of that reconciliation at that stage, because I mean, that guy didn't start making those boxes in order to like run a business and do all of the accounting that comes with all of that faffing around. So the more you can simplify that thing and allow him to make the best boxes he can make, then actually it sort of de-stresses that things for individuals, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. I mean, there's a lot of pressure put on independents, right? You should know this stuff. Traditional employees don't know this stuff. Our employers take care of it for us, right? And so I think being able to say to someone like, you don't want to be thinking about your taxes on a daily basis. I don't. I'm a W-2 employee. I'm a traditional employee. I have a paycheck that comes every 2 weeks. So why would we put that burden on someone who works by themselves, right? So I think it's a rethinking of how we enable people to do their most productive work, especially because the automation is possible now, right? We can serve individual consumers with this automation in a way that maybe 20 or 30 years ago we obviously didn't have the power to do.
Well, and how have you found the take-up of that sort of automated routing piece? You know, there's lots of different talk, isn't there, about, you know, what percentage should be every day, what percentage should be long-term, what, you know, short-term savings, etc. But doing that for people and taking away that burden of it must be a real benefit. I mean, how's the uptake been? Because you launched that this year, didn't you?
Well, yes, the packaging on it was fully finished. You know, this is a long process. So I think the uptake we see is that there is a huge pain point around it, right? So there's an automatic like, oh, thank goodness, right? It like products like retirement sometimes can be more challenging when people are like, hey, I'm just trying to get by right now. But this automation around it, this tax withholding portion, the personal payroll aspect of like, just get it done for me, makes it easy for people to adopt those other products. I would say that like, we are still in the early days of the market understanding that this is a possibility. And so the tax withholding piece ends up being the most important part for people to actually get started in managing that themselves.
Yeah. And the overlap there, I guess, with, the benefit side of things as well. I mean, the US market has got some particular nuances to it when it comes to sort of healthcare and everything around that. Can you, for the sort of more international audience, can you sort of break that down a little bit?
Yeah, so benefits in the United States have historically been distributed by employers, right? The system has been kind of piecemealed together through a series of regulation and world wars and all the things you would expect that make a very not intentional system. But we deliver really critical financial products that many other countries deliver through the government. We deliver them through employers, right? So tax withholding obviously is one. A lot of other countries, you just sort of say at the end of the year, they're like, here's your tax bill, and you know it's taken care of. Here we manage all of that ourselves, right, through payroll. Retirement is issued from employers, right? We have Social Security, but it's not necessarily enough for people to live on, so we augment that with private retirement. And then health insurance in particular is a super complicated market. Like if you break down the United States population, a plurality is employer-sponsored health insurance, but it's not even a large majority because we have veterans care, we have Medicaid, we have Medicare, all of these things. But there's a group of about 30 million people who don't fit in any of those other buckets, and they have to get plans themselves, which is maybe if you've heard about Obamacare, healthcare.gov, those are the sorts of solutions that have been put in place for that sort of like leftover bucket, which is our customers, right? The people who aren't served by other insurance needs.
Yeah. I honestly don't think international view have a really good understanding of how that works. You know, every time I'm in the US, I'm always really paranoid about looking both left and right when I cross the, just because ambulances are really expensive, aren't they? But But it is a real problem, that, particularly if you're self-employed, putting aside those things without all the benefits of a big organization. It's pretty important, not just for your lives, but your families as well in that sense. So.
That's right. It's stability, right? It's the ability, especially for independents who, like we talked about, they earn in a variable way. Something like health insurance is extra important because you need the ability to cover expenses when something happens to you, like all of those sorts of things that insurance was built for. And people are working in a more irregular pattern, so that insurance product ends up being like that much more important to take care of any emergencies.
Great. So what's next? Like, obviously, I mean, the backlog must be long. These aren't the only problems to solve in that sense. And actually, you know, the more you solve, the more you uncover to a certain degree in that sense. So what's next for you guys?
So on the market side, I think one of the things that I mentioned is that this is a very broad market with a lot of different segments, and they need to be communicated to differently.
Yep.
They need to like be understood differently. Like a loan officer and like a YouTube creator, they don't speak the same language when it comes to their finances.
Sure.
So we're working on something right now called the Creator, which is we're basically going on tour to meet creators. Right. Traveling the country in a lot of cool cities like Los Angeles and Nashville and Austin, Miami, to meet with creators in particular, right? This passion-driven economy in particular doesn't want to think about taxes, right? So making space for community to be built and saying like, let us take care of that back office stuff, right? So going sort of vertical by vertical is a really important next step for us as we grow, like getting specific about like the messaging and the value proposition so our customers really understand how our product serves their needs. On the product side, you can imagine there's a large suite of things that we would like to include in the product that are additional benefits on insurance, additional benefits that might help us serve other needs related to health. I won't say too much more about that, right? But there's a whole lot of stuff that our customers want in the benefits category. I will add, though, I think one thing that makes us somewhat unique is that we're pretty tight on what we say we don't do. And it's that, like, obviously independent contractors, freelancers have a lot of needs that we're not meeting, right? Sure. We're not taking on invoicing. We're not taking on a lot of other stuff. And we're pretty strict on that, right? Because it's hard to maintain such a breadth of customer base if you try and, like, do everything for everyone. So what's not on the roadmap for us is trying to become like a stock trading app, right? We're not trying to become an invoicing app. We're not trying to like do tax filing ourselves, right? So there's no need for that. So we really want to hold that benefits space and focus on like, what does it mean to decouple the things that right now come from employers and make them things that individuals can own themselves?
I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, if you look at a lot of the accounting packages as an example there, they're not really made for the business owner. They're made for the head of finance or the CFO within those things. So it's not normal people in that sense. Whereas it sounds very much like you're solving real people problems, and which is great. You know, that's exactly what they want. It's really interesting to see that niches approach as well, because the way in which fintech has been wonderful globally. You know, various different places of accessing communities and sort of going to the community rather than just letting marketing try and wash over people. So I mean, it'd be really fascinating to sort of see how you do more of that and how you position the same product in a different way to really make it relevant to those places. So it's going to be a fun times ahead. Huh?
Yeah, when we were in Miami, we met with one of our customers who's a hairstylist, and he highlighted my hair purple. It's an underneath layer, but like it was just, you know, we want to meet our customers and understand, and like he is passionate about mixing colors and making it look beautiful and making people feel confident, and like he does not care about his taxes, and he shouldn't have to, right? So I think it is about understanding what motivates our customers and like leaning into the thing that empowers them to be the most successful they can possibly be. And it rarely is spending more time on taxes.
Nobody wants to do that, really, do they? But
not really.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of the interview now in terms of the sort of conversation around cash. But what I'd really love to know is, I mean, obviously, as a person who's been in various different roles and various different industries, and you know, quite broadly, I'd say, like as an entrepreneur, you're making it up as you go along in that sense, which a lot of people don't realize in that. But what would be the advice if you sort of went back to your younger self, what would be the thing where you're like, look, do this and it all turns out all right? What would you do?
Well, I guess maybe it's almost the inverse of that, which is like no failure will sink you. And just a confidence that anything that comes up and goes wrong, which it will, and it does, and it will continue to forever. Just an ability to have confidence that it's a stop on the roadmap. It's not the entire story. I think that's a really important thing for people to think about when they're entering entrepreneurship. And then I think the other thing is there are plenty of people who have advice for you, which is here I am. Let me tell you some advice. Lots of people have advice for you. And as an entrepreneur in particular, people are really quick to tell you how to run your business, how to grow your business, how to do it right, how to do it wrong, all of those sorts of things. And at the end of the day, you will be measured by your ability to take the right advice and ignore the wrong advice. And no one can tell you what that is because it is so specific to your journey that like, just know that that's the job. Because I think sometimes it's like, well, that person gave me bad advice. And it's like, well, you took it, right? And like, it's the accountability and ownership of being able to say like, I'm gonna get a lot and it's my job to sort through what makes sense for me and what doesn't. And like having confidence in your own decision-making in that.
Yeah. It's interesting on that first point, it's very rarely fatal, isn't it? You know, there's divergence of the strategy or the plan or dead ends here and there, but it's ensuring it's not fatal to, I mean, obviously from a literal perspective, would be good. Nobody needs to die for this, but but from the business continuing to move forwards, absolutely with you on that one. Isn't it weird when you're starting a business, as you say, the amount of people that do come out the woodwork, which is like, well, if I was you, I would be doing this. But then why are you not? You know, I mean, like I think the saying is don't take advice from somebody you wouldn't take criticism, right?
Sure.
And that's for me has always been quite a good filter on those things. But
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to have to wrap it up because I'm pretty sure you've got places to be, and given the size of this conference, it's going to take you at least 20 minutes to get there.
Get anywhere.
So, but on that note, thank you very much, Kristen, for joining me. Where can people learn a little bit more about you and your company?
Catch.co is our website. catch.co. I'm also fairly active on Twitter, telling our story, just sort of sharing the journey. I'm at Catch Kristen.
Very, very good. All right, guys. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Make sure you follow 11FS on LinkedIn, like every social media place at this stage. And we're pretty damn active everywhere at this stage. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to the 11FS YouTube channel where you can find this and every other episode of this as well. Hope you have a wonderful week, guys. Speak to you soon. Thank you.